when they were putting the pipes down Hurrett Street, ready for the electricity to be installed, some of us boys thought it would be a good idea to build a war memorial with some wee clay to raise funds for a real memorial. We built it just opposite the entrance of Newell's Yard, and a wing jockey gave a cockade and a medal to dress it up. We put a beard and a moustache on it as well, and a group reporter at the time wrote an article about some of the lads in Pulteney seemed to think a real memorial would grow a beard too. Before it was built, as he seemed to take a long time in making up their minds about fit to do it, we collected about 8 or 10 shillings, and that went into the memorial fund. I often wonder if there's a copy of the groat still available with a reporter's account of World War Memorial. It must have been about 1920 or 1922.
I remember Neil once being in Arthur Bruce's shop, middle of summer I think it was. And he had a big tweed jacket, he always tied it in the bottom button, making him look even bigger, jingling his coins in his pocket. And there was a line of books and stuff strung up above the counter, and calendars and things like that. And, I remember Neil sort of looking at the rather dumbstruck glasses behind the counter. So it's nice seeing all these things hanging up there, isn't it? It reminds you of Christmas. So they sort of grinned mildly without really sort of taking this on board. But that was Neil, always jolly.
Because his shop number was 20, that's why they called him 20 man.
The street is a well-known shop at that time was Hugh Logue. What we're talking about just before World War I, Hugh Logue. He was a very driven shopkeeper. He had regular sales and promotions and all sorts of stuff, and he kept calling Hugh Logue's prices down again, Hugh Logue's curtains down again, and his biggest mistake when he advertised his sale of gentlemen's trousers and said that Hugh Logue's trousers are down again. Another image of Bridge Street looking south. On the right hand side is the draper shop of Hugh Logue, and on the left the Farmer's Inn, and that's the one with a wee story. My late business partner Willie McCallan, his father was blacksmith at the Langwell Estates, but later he moved into Wick and became a blacksmith on the railway. And one of his colleagues had retired and had ended up in a wheelchair, but every morning he came down to the station for a cup of tea in the workers' tea room, which was just an old shed really. He couldn't get his wheelchair in at the door, so they used to lift him out of the wheelchair and take him in and sit him down, and he had a cup of tea and a wee bit blether. And then he used to take off in his wheelchair and come down Bridge Street and go into this Farmer's Inn just here. He could just get his wheelchair through that door and no more. So one morning when he came down to the railway station, as he was having his tea, 2 of his kind former colleagues took his wheelchair away and put a new axle in and lengthened it by 3/4 inch. So he had his tea and then headed off down to the Farmer's Inn for his dram, wheeled in at the door and jammed tight. It's one of the most cruel pranks I've ever heard of, but I think later they restored him to his complete mobility.
We lived in Adams Lane, and there were 3 flats there, and there were 6 brothers in it, and 2 sisters. Now that was 11, and there were just 3 rooms. But it'd be 2 rooms, a garret sort of at that time, you know. And there's a charity shop one day, and I was looking in this room, and she said, nobody goes in there. Oh, I said, I was born in there. Oh, you couldn't be born in here. I said, we were brought up here, and it belonged to Christmas Leach, belonged to her father, and he had down below where the charity shop now was a little, I would call it a jewellery shop, and it was his property. I loved living on Bridge Street. You saw everything that went on, the processions. Our house was always full on a Saturday night. Folk coming in and sitting looking out the window watching this person and the next person, who had a hat on, who hadn't a hat on, type of thing, you know.
George Dunnett, very distinguished looking man. George could tie up a parcel like nobody, beautiful, precise and everything. Life in the shop in those days was very much revolved around country life and agricultural life in a way. The biggest seller, I think, was probably rubber boots, followed by tackety boots. And of course, shoe shops in those days were remarkably different. You had a fire going in the front, And then they had a big sort of shelf, dividing shelf, and behind it was a little strip of carpet. Very discreet, salon-like atmosphere. And I remember when I was at the high school, I'd go in there and help during the summer. They would repair a bit of shoes too in the old days. There's an old cobbler called Murdo Stephen, I think his name was. He was a real character. What would happen is that on Thursday, especially on Thursday, the wifeys would come in from John O'Groats and Castletown, all sorts of places, and leave all their bags, stuff on the shop floor. This was tolerated. It was a kind of trade-off. The hope was that by leaving their bags with messages and things there, that they would also buy their boots and shoes. Maybe it did, maybe it worked, maybe it didn't, but it was a convenience. There was many a time Murdo or Willie would lick a bowl or a cake off the top of the wifey's bags because he said, oh, they'll never miss it, they'll never miss it. And the trick, of course, it was a well-known retail trick, was to take down lots of shoes for people to look at. Some people wouldn't know what they wanted. Very few people knew exactly what they wanted, and some wanted to pass the time of day. But of course, in those days, all the shoes were in boxes, tissue paper. And after taking down 9 or 10 shoes and tissue paper all over the place, and she, in her heart, the wifey really didn't want to buy anything, but felt obliged to buy something. So there you are, you look at her and then there'd be moments like this, and the first one to speak would lose.
The Drapery stores in Bridge Street that belonged to Mackenzie Miller. He was also a self-taught sculptor, but he was a very, very keen and good businessman. And when we, myself and Willie McCallum, first started up in business, we were working late in the shop one night in High Street when there was a tap on the door, and I turned round and here was Mackenzie Miller looking through at us. So I opened the door and asked him to come in. And he came in and he said, I just popped in to wish you boys well in your job. You know, I hope you're successful and you've all success in the world. But he said, I wonder if I could give you a word of advice. And I said, oh yes, well, I always listen to advice, especially when it comes from you. And he said, well, the first thing is, run your business as if nobody else exists. And say you're selling a shirt, and you say to them, that shirt is 19 and 6. And they say to ye, I can get it for 18 and 11 out of Fred Shearer's. Just you say to them, Fred who? Just I'll tell you again, run your business as if nobody else exists. And then he looked quickly over both shoulders and smiled and said, and then come back at night and keep your eye on the buggers.
Could only sell a little wee cauliflower and a meal, and everything was loose. Barley, lentils, peas, a lot. That was a full-time job in the morning. And rolled oats and oatmeal and self-rising flour and plain flour. The bags were put in was called the Allen Suppliers. The bags that we'd put them in. We'd spend the whole morning in that cellar. Down the counter there, and we was weighing out barley and everything on one side. Another side was rebaking. All that things were cut in the machine, and with more butter in the machine. And my mother brought me a press weight. She gave me a rifle for putting the ball in because butter on them. Oh.
When I was 15, I got a job in Bootsy Chemist as a message boy. It was quite an interesting job. You meet a lot of people because there's a lot of farmers and that these used to come into Bootsy Chemist for what they used to call the farms and gardens sort of department, that they used to take in all the chemicals and medicines for the animals. And we used to deliver a lot of that stuff to the vets in the Doon. It was quite interesting. Just very busy on a Thursday because that was the day, marked day. The farmers used to come into Wick, and of course their wives used to go and do the shopping, and it's quite a big day. And then with a lot of farmers came out of Mark, they made a beeline for a Backbridge Street Club, and that did a lot of jolly times in here on a Thursday afternoon. In Boots, one of your duties was as a message boy. You had to tidy up everything, sweep the street, and you had to clean the windows. That was done every day and they had a brass bit down at the bottom of the window that went right along, and then the brass on the door, the handle and the footplate down at the bottom of the door, and it had to be shining. It was always bad on a Monday because you never worked on a Sunday, and it would get a bit of green, so you had a lot of work on a Monday if you had that already. So this particular day, when I was working away at the windows and whistling away, and the next thing I heard was an awful crash behind us. And my goodness, I looked round, and this was Box's window, Mackenzie's window. This is a coup that had escaped. He didn't escape the rest of them, but he drifted in till the China shop at Box's head there. And oh my, what a mess. And a commotion, and then because they used to take coups through Bridge Street and right up past the parish church and up Green Road to the slaughterhouse. And this is where they were going, and this coup got loose, and oh, Millie, of course, I was here watching the whole scene, and we always mind there's a few words said of it, and I always think about a bottle in a China shop. It wasn't a bottle, it was a cube, but I mean, it was the same sort of thing, but it was very interesting.
The school would go to the cinema. I remember going to see the bridge in the River Kwai. The whole school went one sunny afternoon. But the cinema was a big thing. People would queue for the Pavilion Cinema after the war. It was a real Art Deco cinema with Art Deco designs. And the cashier lady was a lady called Bunty Bryan, who lived out the South Road. Anyway, the cinema was very big, with a girl selling ice cream, El Dorado ice cream, hard as a brick. The good thing was you didn't get very much of it because the top was halfway down and the bottom was only halfway up. And invariably your wooden spoon would break. And the usherette was a woman of great courage because she had to master the act of walking backwards downstairs, lighting up all the ice creams on lines made, orange ice blocks, that was it. A dangerous place in many respects because you could get trampled in the rush to leave before the national anthem came up. That became a very practiced art, an orderly withdrawal after the credits. In fact, cinema was taken very seriously. They had a full-time manager, Mr. A.N. Roy. I remember him. He was there in the evenings in his dinner jacket, very smart, with slick back hair. We got thrown out once for causing a nuisance. We weren't allowed back in until we went round to see A.N. Roy. And they had a commissionaire in the green uniform with the yellow epaulettes, very posh. Looked like the doorman at Harrods in London.
Looking at an image of Mackenzie and Shearer's, a well-known drapery store in Wick, which existed in High Street. I remember way back in the early 50s when I was a message boy with James H. Miller, a gents outfitter in Wick, and Jimmy Miller sent me along to George for a message. I can't remember what the particular message was, but I remember going in at the front door and George was standing behind the counter looking out of the left-hand window of the shop along Bridge Street, and he turned to me and he said, "You know, I've been standing here for a whole hour watching Ramsay Turner's," that was another draper shop, watching Ramsay Turner's shop, and he hasn't had a single customer for the whole hour. And the funny thing about that was that George never even saw the irony.
After the war, things got very much more pleasant in the town, and in school the mood changed considerably, and we began to do things that really we'd been missed as teenagers. One of these things was sport. The first thing we came across was what's called the Victory Sports. It was held to celebrate the end of the war and held in the back playground of the school. There were two playgrounds in school, one on each side of the gym and toilet block. It was the usual running and jumping. It was unusual for us because we hadn't done it before, really. We enjoyed it. The prizes went with the time, in that there were no medals, there were no cups. There were wooden plaques which had been hand-painted in the art department. The intention was good and appreciated.
Quite soon after the war, because a shop was open 7 days a week, you weren't allowed to trade 7 days a week. You could only trade 6 days a week. So in order to be open 7 days a week, and one of the days was Sunday, we used to have what we called, which is then now called the Sunday shop, as we used to call it, which was an additional. I don't know if you can imagine when you're coming over the bridge and you're looking at the Cat's Cafe, there's a little low door on the right hand side, and that used to be the entrance to a store. And I believe, this is long before I came to Wick, I believe that every Saturday night they used to take basic chocolates and sweets through into that shop and then sell the Sunday papers from there, because they weren't allowed to sell them in the shop, which was trading 6 days a week. And it was thanks to Mrs. Jess Page, as she was then, that changed it. It was a bylaw, I believe, and she managed to change it that you could do both, because it was a big job, I believe, that they had to do all this transferring. It must have been late 40s, maybe into the 50s. Sunday and Saturday were the two busiest days. And the Sunday papers brought people in that maybe normally would not have had occasion to come into the shop.
Every Christmas there was Santa and the Christmas tree in a shop called Dainty Dips, and my mother took my brother down to visit Santa. They queued up, and when it was his turn, Santa asked, "What would you like for Christmas, James?" To which he replied, "You're no Santa, you're Tommy Mulrain and you live round the corner from us."
All shop I remember was Alex Johnson, of course, and Alex Johnson's shop was very distinctive, and it was quite bleak in many ways. I remember being up when I was a small boy. Wonderful lighting, studio lighting. And they had the classical sofa, of course, and I suppose you'd wear a sailor suit in these days and be framed. The mothers wanted the children to look very smart, and the sailor suit was a classic. So I'm glad to say, never photographed in a sailor suit. I was photographed in a kilt once. It's about the last time I wore a kilt. Be arrested now or try to wear it. But Alex's shop is, I always remember the dry wood of it. Everything was dry woodwork. And at the top of the stairs, the bare stairs, he had a giant jungle scene made of silver paper, made out of tinsel. Quite clever, but enormous, with a black background, jungle trees, and that was on the landing going up to his studio. And he never had much in his shop. I think he's a more professional photographer, but he had rolls of roll film in those days, for box cameras, Kodak and Ilford film. And I remember years later coming back to Wick, when I was growing up, and then I had a friend of mine up with me from England, from Manchester, and showing him around Wick. And there was Alex Johnson's shop with a beautiful mahogany plate camera in the window. I mean, beautiful. Brass fittings, polished mahogany. And I said to Gregory, the owner of the shop's quite a well-known man here in town and quite character. And Gregory fancied buying the camera. Let's go in and meet him. And there was Alex Johnson there. They came out to meet us, and spry, sandy-haired, looked at us, and Gregory says, "I've been admiring your camera in the window and interested in buying it." And Alec looked at him sort of rather dryly, said, "The camera is not for sale." And Gregory sort of pushed it a bit and said, "Well, it's in the window, I mean, and I'm sure it's quite expensive, but I'm very interested." And Alex says, "The answer is no. It's a simple word."
Christmas time, they're sending chickens, rabbits to their friends down south. All they had on was a label around the head or the cockerel's neck. You caught it by the feet and slung it through to the sorting office. Rabbits, a pair of rabbits together, tied up with just a label around the neck. You wouldn't get away with that nowadays. It was busy. I mean, nowadays they pay pension straight into the bank.
We're looking at an image now of Stafford Place as it was many years ago, with the Northern Ensign office and a grocer shop and draper shop which occupied the lower floor of the building. And we're looking at, there's railings along the front and steps that went down into a basement. And in the early years there was a bakehouse down in the basement, but it was closed by the town council in 1905 because it didn't have running water. You can't imagine a bakehouse today without running water.